Welcome everyone to Monday Morning Morons for August 27th, 2018. This week, let's talk a little bit about reality, because some people clearly don't live in it. YDSA urges socialists to infiltrate public education. You see what I mean? These people clearly do not live in the same reality as the rest of us, because if they did, they'd know that's already happened. As we'll demonstrate with the other articles this week, your radical socialist brothers and sisters already rule academia. Where do you think dumb shits like this learn that money grows on trees? Perhaps from professors like this one, huh? Popular econ professor advances universal job guarantee plan with Democrats. We'll come back to that, but let's finish up with the call for socialists to educate our kids. The Young Democratic Socialists of America organization is urging socialists to take jobs as teachers in order to exploit the political, economic, and social potential the industry holds. Why Socialists Should Become Teachers, an 11-page pamphlet crafted by YDSA and the Democratic Socialist Labor Commission, contends that education is a strategic industry to organize and offers prospective socialist educators a basic roadmap for how to get a job in education. Here's the thing, they're not wrong. Education is at the very root of all other industries. You can't send a spaceship to Mars until you've learned some math and physics. You can't build a car until you've learned some mechanics, etc., right? Now, I'm not saying every job out there requires a college degree program. They don't. But every job requires some education. Even farming requires some learning. How many seeds do you need for 40 acres of corn? I've no idea. I'm not a farmer, but that's math, right? How many bushels will you need to sell to pay your bills and feed your family? That's economics, right? On a small scale, sure, but it's still economics. So education is indeed the foundation of everything else. The problem comes when you're teaching people what to think rather than how to think. You impede innovation when people don't learn how to question the so-called truths. Suppose, for instance, every farmer just accepted that the sickle was the best way to harvest wheat because that's what you taught them. We don't need to improve. This is the way to do it. No one would have invented the combine then, would they? And probably 70% of the world's population would starve to death because there wouldn't be enough food. Before anyone says it, no, I have no scientific justification for that number. I just picked a number out of my ass there to make a point, you picky people. Back to the article. The pamphlet begins by outlining the success of the recent West Virginia teacher strike, which it attributes to creative shop floor organizing from teachers who believed in socialist politics. You see what I mean about not living in reality? Here you are saying socialists should infiltrate education, and then in the next breath you tell us socialist teachers organized a strike and won. Do you see what you just said, genius? The socialists have already infiltrated education. Now let's talk about this so-called win for a second, because this is yet another case of you living in a completely different reality than the rest of us. Our immediate win in West Virginia was a 5% raise for all public sector workers, plus halting charter school legislation and attacks on seniority, the document boasts. But crucially, our movement's demand was that the money come from highly profitable corporations that have long exploited West Virginia's natural wealth. While the funding debate has yet to be resolved, the pamphlet credits socialist agitators with pressing for corporate tax increases, saying most union leaders simply expect lawmakers to figure out where the money comes from after securing pay raises. And here we see socialist economics on display. Give us more money, and we don't give a fuck where it comes from. Well, Cupcake, where it comes from matters. You don't live in a vacuum. Money doesn't just magically fall out of the sky. You are a public sector worker, meaning every single penny paid to you comes from the government. The government, and this is the part that really twists you socialists into a knot, but the government has no money. None. Zip. Zilch. Nothing. Every single penny the government spends is a penny taken from someone else. That's what taxes do. The government takes your money and spends it however they like. Now, I'm not a radical running around saying tax is theft or anything like that. In some instances, pooling our money together to pay for public works can be beneficial to all of us. Think roads, sewers, emergency services, things like that. But the fundamental fact doesn't change. All of the money to pay for these things was taken from you. To be clear, this is not my opinion. It is a basic fundamental fact. If you never ever take away anything else from the shit I say or talk about, at least remember that. The government's money is your money. All of it. Socialists have a long history of involvement in the workplace, the booklet asserts, noting that while existing labor unions are imperfect from a socialist perspective, the Democratic Socialists of America organization believes it is now in a position to develop a concerted, coordinated presence in unions to help shape the militancy and political ideology of those unions and ultimately to play a role in building working class power. Did anyone else catch the contradiction? We want to lead this militant political ideology. You're not creating working class power. You're trying to create your own power hierarchy with you at the top. That's all you're doing. That's all socialism has ever done everywhere it has been tried. This is exactly why socialism never works and why you dumb shits keep insisting that it's never been real socialism. It hasn't, and it never will be, because what you say is not what you do. Now, how about a little irony before we move on? Notably, this section concludes by pointing out that teaching is still one of the most stable professions in the United States, asserting that even in West Virginia, where teachers experience some of the lowest pay in the nation, they were sometimes the highest paid workers in their communities. Confused? Let me put it to you this way. Teacher Jane Smith over there is the highest paid person in, Fayette County, West Virginia. But she's still oppressed and deserves even more money because there's an investment banker in New York making more than her. And where does the money to pay Jane more come from? Not from the New York investment banker, because he doesn't live in West Virginia. It comes from raising taxes on her clearly not rich neighbors. That's how equality works in their world, because they simply do not live in reality. Okay, let's move on to the economics article because, wow, this is a doozy. Popular econ professor advances universal job guarantee plan with Democrats. Remember when your brain just exploded as you heard that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had a degree in economics? Well, this ought to clear up exactly how that happened. Scholar, the government's red ink is our black ink. Their deficit is our surplus. You can see where we're headed, right? And remember, this is an econ professor. She's teaching other people economics. A Stony Brook University economist who has become a darling among social progressive politicians and policy wonks is advising the Democratic Party to run on the idea of a universal job guarantee, and it's a proposal that's gained a lot of traction. Stephanie Kelton served as chief economist for the U.S. Senate Budget Committee in 2015, and then as senior economic advisor for Bernie Sanders' presidential bid. Today, she serves as a leading voice among far-left Democrats seeking to help advance a political blue wave. Yep, scary thought here, but this woman was actually employed by the U.S. Senate Budget Committee and advised good old Bernie. Explains a lot when you think about it. This is the so-called expert these people are consulting. Just wait till we get to her little example. You'll see what I mean. Her universal job guarantee proposal has been called the biggest idea in Washington in a lengthy profile on Kelton in Huffington Post that reports even Wall Street is mulling her idea along with progressive think tanks and politicians such as Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Kirsten Gillibrand. Everyone wants a piece of Kelton these days because a simple radical idea she has been workshopping her entire career is the next big thing in Democratic Party politics. She calls it the Job Guarantee, a federal program offering a decent job to every American who wants to work in every county in the country, at any phase of the business cycle, HuffPost reports. It's a practical expression of her monetary thinking. To her, governments aren't directly constrained by how much programs cost. The serious concern is inflation, and a job guarantee would revolutionize the way the United States manages the value of the dollar, forcing the Federal Reserve to stop creating unemployment when it wants to keep prices down. I'd like to point out that the Federal Reserve does not create unemployment. They create debt. While we're on the subject, that's all they create. They loan taxpayer money to taxpayers and charge interest. The same as your bank does, except your bank is constrained by federal laws created by the Federal Reserve. At no point in that cycle is any more actual money created, resulting in, you guessed it, debt. As a simple example to illustrate, say you deposit $100 into the bank. Let's not get into where that 100 came from. We just need a starting point to illustrate. Now, you have $100 to buy things with. However, that $100 doesn't just sit in the bank. By law, the bank can loan up to 90% of that 100 to someone else. So they loan $90 to me. Now I have some buying power also. Together, you and I can buy $190 worth of goods or services. Thing is, there's still only 100 actual dollars between the two of us. When I put my $90 into the bank, they can now loan the next person $81 to buy stuff. 90% of my 90. So now we're up to $271 of buying power, and yet still only 100 actual dollars exists between the three of us. Plus, I owe whatever the interest rate was on the 90. The third person owes whatever the interest rate was on the 81. So we're both already in debt, and there's no way to pay that back because there is no more money. There's still only the original 100. Now things snowball into a complicated mess of shit from there, and there are people out there who explain this concept a lot better than I can. Look into it if you're curious how the Fed creates and destroys money. But you can see from the simple example that the only thing the banks create is debt. This is exactly the same way the Federal Reserve functions, except that they're loaning money to banks, not individuals. They create IOUs. That's it. Off on a tangent there. Back to the article. On a recent podcast with the Wilderness, the professor of public policy and economics described her bold progressive economic agenda. I have for a very long time been an advocate of a pretty ambitious program that's designed to address the potential displacement of labor as automation continues, and that is federally funded by locally administered jobs programs. Kind of a new deal molded on the Works Progress administration, Kelton told host John Favreau. The jobs can be anything, she added. People tend to think of a guy with a shovel filling in a pothole or something like that. Those jobs can happen as well, but be very creative with the type of work. Maybe an elder care facility can use a few extra hands. The sky is really the limit. I would like to point out here that she's not completely off her rocker with this idea. She's thinking along the lines of public works projects. Something like the Hoover Dam or the federal interstate system, stuff like that. And those things can benefit society and the economy. So I'm not completely opposed to the concept she's trying to sell here. It's just that she doesn't seem to grasp that these things have to be paid for somehow. You'll see what I mean with her example. I don't think most people have the slightest idea what a budget deficit is, Kelton told him. I'll use a simple example. Suppose the government spends $100 into the economy, but only taxes 90% back out. We label that our government deficit. So somewhere, somebody scratches down on a ledger, -10 for the government, you're in deficit. We say, shame on you, that is very bad that you did that. But we completely miss the fact that somewhere in the economy, there's $10 out there that wouldn't have been there if the government had balanced its budget. The government's red ink is our black ink. The deficit is our surplus, Kelton said. So every time someone talks about the need to rein in the deficit, balance the budget, what they are really saying is their goal is to shrink the private sector's surplus. And I think if people understood it in those terms, they would be a whole lot less enthusiastic about running around and trying to shrink the budget deficits and so forth. Did you catch the flaw? It's pretty obvious. Let's trace your little example from the beginning. The government spends $100 on something. A project, the salary of a worker, whatever. Now, where did that initial 100 come from? Remember what I said earlier? The government has no money. Every single penny they spend comes from you, the taxpayer. So the government spending $100 is not where this little example actually begins, is it? It begins with the government taking $100 from the public. So you've already extracted 100 from the economy before your example even begins. Then they spend that 100 and take another 90 out. Now you say, that leaves 10 in the economy that wouldn't have otherwise been there. But it doesn't. That leaves 10 that was already in the economy before your example began. Now supposing they repeat this process 10 times, each time leaving $10 behind. Great! After 10 cycles of government spending, all the money they initially took out of the economy is finally back in it. Except, now the government has no more money. They can't pay for another public works project or another worker or whatever. So what happens now? They take another 100 and start all over again. Now, if the government projects are adding value to the economy, then the public can end up with more money to contribute to taxes. However, in practice, that generally doesn't happen. Every government project remains public. In other words, the government takes your money to build a road. Yay, we need roads, right? Now we can all move around easier, goods get shipped faster, etc. Many varied benefits come from having good roads. However, that road still belongs to the public, and the public must pay to maintain it. So the $100 we spent to build, for example, is not the total cost of that road. We now have to keep paying a worker to repair it as needed. You now have to keep paying for materials and equipment he needs to do so. How do we pay for that? Taxes. The government takes more of your money and gives it to Bob the road builder to maintain that road. The only way this is sustainable is if that road adds at least its own cost to the economy. If it does not, then we all lose money paying for this thing, and it's a net loss to the economy. More money is taken out of the economy to pay for it than is put back in. Now, in our little microeconomic example, what is the inevitable result? What happens when the net loss of that road is more than the entire economy? You do not have enough money for the government to take from you, so they can't pay Bob the builder over there to maintain the road. He's now unemployed and going broke fast. You're already broke because the government already took your money for the road, remember? So now, no one has any money at all. Yay! Equality at last, huh? Debt doesn't exist in a vacuum, and money doesn't just fall out of the sky. As an economist, I'm betting you know that. You cannot spend money that you don't have unless you borrow it from somewhere else. And you cannot keep borrowing forever. At some point, there simply is no more money to borrow. Now what? Asked what it would look like to develop economic policy without worrying about the deficit, she replied, if we stop gauging public policy based on whether it adds to the deficit or not, but instead we say the success of my budget is based on whether I achieved the things I was trying to achieve, what would be possible is if we looked at our resources, all of the labor that we have available in the United States today, all of the factories, the machines, all of the potential harnessing our technology, know-how, and so forth. If we said our objective is to make the maximum use of the resources that we have, target child poverty, target African American youth unemployment, target in a whatever it is, figure out what problems you're trying to solve with your budget. Recognize that you can't do everything because resources really are limited, and prioritize. In an interview with The Intercept, she dismissed number crunchers. If we had the Congressional Budget Office in 1935, we wouldn't have Social Security. If we had had it in 1964, we wouldn't have Medicare, Kelton said. It has become, in many ways, the key impediment to the progressive agenda and just good economic policy generally. You mean we wouldn't have the two biggest leeches on the entire U.S. economy right now? Both currently running in the red, barreling full steam ahead toward bankruptcy and dragging all of us with it? Yeah, sure would suck if we never had those things, huh? She argued progressives will need to be willing to disregard their proposal's CBO scores or work to reform the way that they're calculated, rebranding the Intercept reports. Adding, she suggests change the word deficit to non-government surplus. And there you have it. Economics 101 from the economics professor. Change the word debt to surplus and all is right in the world. Next time your bank calls about your mortgage, tell them they owe you money, because that debt on your statement is a surplus. See if they don't die laughing before they seize your house. Reality, lady. The rest of us live in it. Maybe you should visit sometime. Speaking of government-funded net losses, professors get $248,000 grant to study gender microaggressions. Anyone want to take a wild stab at explaining how this adds value to the economy? Because as you can see, that's $248,000 that the government took from us to pay for this study. Call me a pessimist, but somehow I doubt that this so-called answers revealed here are going to add more than $248,000 of value to the economy. The National Science Foundation has awarded 3 Iowa State University professors more than $248,000 to study gender microaggressions in engineering, claiming that the research will ultimately help students feel safe. On August 13th, the taxpayer-funded National Science Foundation granted funding for the study Collaborative Research and Intersectional Perspective to Studying Microaggressions in Engineering Programs, which is slated to cost taxpayers at least $248,744 over the next 4 years. For anyone wondering, that's roughly $21,000 a year for these 3 researchers to language police engineers. Not a bad payday for complete bullshit, huh? Engineering professor Christina, I'm not even going to try that, will lead the project over the next 4 years, told Campus Reform that microaggressions are important to study in academia because they cause harm to students, especially minorities. I find microaggressions particularly interesting because they are normalized in our everyday life, but have significant consequences over time, said Christina, who explained that the idea for the research came from her personal experience in engineering. The contribution of this grant is bringing an intersectionality perspective to the concept of microaggressions, where we consider the interconnected nature of race and gender, she explained. Ultimately, the $248,000 grant will culminate in a research project that will collect stories from diverse identity groups in order to obtain a well-rounded understanding of microaggressions in engineering programs. Wait. You mean to tell me I'm paying you to collect stories of hurt fifis from various engineering students? That's it. That's the research that costs $248,000? When I said net loss, I guess I should have said total loss. Your tax dollars at work, ladies and gentlemen. And yet they still wonder why we don't have enough money to feed the starving or house the homeless. Maybe because we're paying to hear stories about hurt feelings from entitled college kids instead. Again, reality, dipshits. The rest of us live in it. Maybe you should visit once in a while. Alright, Bob. Toxic masculinity time. Woman, 19, faked kidnapping, sent ransom notes to extort father. A 19-year-old Kentucky woman who police said wanted to make some quick money faked her kidnapping, even writing her own ransom notes to her family. Abigail Farley of Corbin was reported missing by her father Mark after he received various text messages saying she had been kidnapped and that her alleged abductors wanted $400 for her release or she would be killed, according to court records. That's a pretty low ransom, don't you think? He said he was receiving messages from her phone saying she had been abducted for money because she owed some money, Lieutenant Coy Wilson told WYMT-TV. Court records show that he also received text messages from another number. Farley's father, who was given a drop-off location to leave the money, contacted police, who then reached out to the FBI for help. Corbin police said Farley was actually pretending to be her abductor and was using a texting app to send the random notes. When her father dropped off $400, police pinged her phone and discovered her inside an apartment. After dropping it off, we went and searched all the residences, and after a couple, we found her, Wilson said. The 19-year-old admitted to police that she made it all up and just wanted her father to pay up, WYMT-TV reported. Farley was charged with falsely reporting an incident, theft by extortion, and disorderly conduct. Wilson said Farley gave various reasons as to why she wanted the money and believed a possible drug problem is the reason behind all of this. Did you spot the real crime here? Here's a hint. Victim blaming. Dad here just blamed this poor, oppressed, drug-addled teenager for the whole thing. Typical toxic male. Patriarchal shitlord. Shame on you. It's not her fault. She's an oppressed victim. It's society's fault. It's the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy's fault, Dad. Okay, Bob, give us a laugh. Ferrari driving 137-mile-per-hour Iowa speeder had the worst excuse. Iowa is known for its wide open spaces, but that doesn't mean you can drive your Ferrari wide open through them. The Iowa State Patrol posted a photo to Facebook on Monday of a white Ferrari 488 Spider that was pulled over for doing 137 miles per hour near Mason City. But the driver had an excuse, just not a good one. She told the officer that she thought she was doing 100 miles per hour. For anyone wondering, the maximum speed limit anywhere in Iowa is 70 miles per hour. So Miss whatever her name is, that would still be speeding. A lot. That's it for this week. Remember the social justice mantra: women are victims, men are oppressors, and feminism is just about equality. I'll see you all next time.